Welcome back to the Food Border YouTube channel. I know it's been a while since we've released a new video, but it's New Year, we're in a new kitchen, and we have a new recipe for you. So today we're going to be making everything bagels. They're completely vegan, they're all gluten-free, so if you haven't eaten a bagel in a really long time, this is the recipe for you. And this recipe is pretty simple. The only complicated bit about it is that we're going to blend our own bread flour mix, but other than that, it's pretty much the same as making any other bagels, normal bagels. So we're going to start like we would with an ordinary recipe and sort of rehydrate the yeast. I've got 10 grams of yeast in this bowl, and in total I've got 575 grams of warm water. But I'm just going to divide that, so I'm going to add about a cup to this yeast, and then we'll add the rest a little bit later. So to this yeast I'm just adding 250 grams. So we'll just give that a really quick mix. And then you're just going to set this aside in a warm place, and the yeast will start to froth and bubble up. If the yeast doesn't, that's how you know that your yeast isn't alive anymore and you probably need to replace it. And then into a large mixing bowl, we're going to sift our flour. So I've already weighed out all the flours that I'm going to need for this recipe. So in this bowl, I've got 75 grams of potato starch, 75 grams of tapioca starch, 140 grams of brown rice, 140 grams of sorghum flour, and 17 grams of oat flour. So I know it's a little bit annoying to have to try and source all these different flours, but if you're getting into gluten-free baking, this is going to really level up your baking, mixing your own flours. We're going to sift that into this bowl. And the sifting is obviously going to aerate the flour, but it's also going to help you make sure that the flours are well combined. Okay, to this dry mix, I'm also going to add 1.5 teaspoons of salt. So in total, this is 500 grams of flour. And basically the way that I've combined it is I've made 70% of this flour a high protein flour. So that's the sorghum, the brown rice, and the oat flour. And then 30% of that flour is starch. So this combination is just trying to replicate wheat flour. You're trying to replicate the amount of protein and starch that's in wheat flour so that you get a really nice rise in the gluten-free bakes. Okay, so like I said, we're sifting to aerate the flour, but also to make sure that these flours are combined. It's sort of just the preliminary mix because we're going to put this in the food processor and then it will mix again. So we'll set that aside for a second. And then the next step that we're going to do is we're going to add our binding agent. So in gluten-free baking, you always need something to hold everything together. So when you're talking about wheat flour, you've got gluten to do that. And it's especially important in vegan baking when you're not using any eggs. So in this case, we're going to use psyllium and chia seeds as our binder. So I've got some ground chia seed here. I've ground this myself just using a coffee grinder, but you can just buy ground flaxseed if you can't grind chia or can't find ground chia. So into this bowl, I'm going to add 12 grams of ground chia seeds. And I'm also going to add 20 grams of psyllium husk. So psyllium husk is just like a fiber, but when you hydrate it with liquid, it becomes sort of like a gel, and it acts a lot like gluten in gluten-free bakes. I'm also going to add 1 tablespoon of brown sugar to this. You can add whatever sugar you have. I just like the flavor of brown sugar, and it also gives gluten-free bakes a nice color. And then the remaining of the water is going to go into this mix. So basically what's going to happen is it's going to gel really quickly. So you basically have to add the liquid really quickly, and then you're going to have to mix really quickly. Okay, so we're just going to mix that up, and it's ready to go once it's gel-like. So it's kind of the same as making a flax egg that you would in just normal vegan baking. It's going to gel up just like that. Okay, that's fine. So now I'm going to combine everything in a food processor. You can use a stand mixer at home. Actually, in the recipe I have online, I've given the description as using a stand mixer fitted with a dough hook. I figured most people have stand mixers at home, and it does seem a little bit strange to do this in the food processor, but I don't have a stand mixer and I find the food processor is fine. So I'm basically just going to put the flour in the food processor. And then we're just going to pulse to combine the flours. This mix of psyllium and chia has started to gel up. So it's a completely different consistency now, and that can go into the food processor as well. So we're just going to combine it with the flour. Again, just pulsing. And then we're ready to add the yeast. So you can see that the yeast has bubbled up, so it's still alive and it's good to go. So I'm just gonna put my lid back on and stream the yeast mixture into the food processor. Turn that on. So basically the food processor is going to do the mixing and the kneading for us. In gluten-free baking, kneading is not that important. We basically only need dough to develop gluten, and this doesn't have any gluten in it. But we do need it to be mixed really well. So I'm just going to put it on high speed and process it for about 3 minutes. If you're using a stand mixer, you can do the same thing with a dough hook. Okay, so just scraping down the sides to make sure that all the flour is incorporated. And then we'll mix. Okay, so that's probably about enough time. So the dough will be very, very, very sticky, and that's one of the things that you need to start to learn about making yeasted gluten-free doughs, is that they will be very sticky when you pull them out of the mixer or out of the food processor like this. Gluten-free flour basically absorbs way more moisture than wheat flour does, and you have to accommodate for that by adding more water. But in some ways, gluten-free is a little bit easier because you have to do less work. There's no kneading. I'm just going to transfer the dough from here into this bowl. I'm going to put a little bit more brown rice flour in the bottom, and then it's good to go. We're just going to let it rise for 2 hours. Okay, so you just need a little bit in the bottom. So you can see that the dough looks very sticky and wet, but that's exactly what we want. And we don't have to handle it very much, so we don't have to worry about it sticking to our fingers or anything. So I've got most of that dough out of there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of just move the dough around with my hands a bit so that that flour on the bottom of the bowl can come up along the sides, and this will just stop the dough from excessively sticking to the bowl. But that's pretty much it. Then we're just going to leave it. I'm not going to put flour or anything on the top. I'm just going to cover it with a tea towel, and then I'll put it in a warm place for 2 hours. Okay, so fortunately we don't have to wait 2 hours because I already made a dough before, and this one's ready to go. So you can see that this one's actually risen a lot, and it's really nice and bubbly. So I'm going to just put some brown rice flour on my surface here. And then I'm going to tip the dough out. And we don't have to handle the dough too much. Basically, all I'm going to do is divide this into 8. So I'm just going to use a sharp knife to cut it into 8 pieces. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can weigh it if you like, up to you. So I'm just going to take one of my 8 pieces. I'll just move this dough out the way for a sec. And basically you're just going to roll it, make it come together under your palm. You're going to move your fingers in towards your palm, so in towards the dough, to make a ball. I've got a little bit too much flour on the bottom, so So I'm just going to move it, fold it in on itself, and then start again. Okay, that's looking good. And then all you need to do is make a hole in the center. So the hole actually has to be surprisingly large because we're going to boil these and then we're going to bake them. So it has 2 opportunities to close. So you want to make the holes quite large, like maybe a couple of centimeters. Okay. And then I'm just going to place it on a tray, and then we'll boil them once all the bagels have been shaped. Okay, so my water is boiling and we can finish the bagels. So I'm probably gonna slot about 2 bagels into the pot at a time. If this is your first time doing it, you can just start with 1 bagel to get a feel for it. Basically, what's gonna happen is that the bagels will sink, and then once they rise, leave them on the one side for 30 seconds and then flip them. So 2 in, and you can see that the bagels have sunk and now they've started to rise. So we're just going to leave this one bubbling away for about 30 seconds, and then after that we'll flip it and then we'll take it out. Okay, they're ready to turn, so I'm going to turn the first one. And then we'll turn the second one. You can also see that they've started to expand, so they're suddenly a lot bigger than they were when they first went into the water. All right, and that's them good to go. So we'll just gently take them out. Let them drain a little. They will be hot, so probably don't touch them. So the water is not quite boiling anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give it two minutes to come back up to boiling, because you want it to be really hot when the bagels go in. So each time you boil the bagel, it's going to cool the water down. So just make sure that it's boiling again before you do the second step. And while we wait for that, we can season these ones that have gone in the water already. So generously, you can just put your everything seasoning on top. The dough will be very wet, so you won't need to use anything to stick the seasoning on. Okay, my water's boiling once again, so I'm going to dip these back in. And while we wait for those, we can do the rest of the seasoning. Okay, and that's it. They're ready for the oven. So they'll go into the oven for about 25 to 30 minutes, depending on whether your oven is fan forced or not. And then they'll be ready to enjoy. All right, so there we have it. Our everything bagels are baked, and they've been cooling for about an hour and a half. So with every gluten-free vegan bake that you make, I highly recommend that you wait until they're 100% cold before trying to cut them. The gluten-free structure will still be forming as they're cooling down, so just leave them alone. I know it will be really hard. I know these guys look amazing, but I promise you, you won't regret it. So I'll just show you what one of these looks like inside, so you can see what a nice crumb structure we get. So they look beautiful, ready to eat, and I'm very excited to tuck into them. Thank you so much for watching. You can find the full recipe for these everything bagels on our website, blue-border.com. And if you liked the video, give us a like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.